We're going to pick up at Matthew chapter 14. And so if you, I don't really need to give a whole ton of context here other than to say we're going to be leading off with John the Baptist today. And if you don't know who John the Baptist is, John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin. And he was the one who was the voice in the wilderness, as is described in Isaiah, and is the one who was declaring the way for the Lord. And if you remember, Jesus' ministry didn't begin until after Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And so we're going to pick up here at chapter 14 and verse 1, and it says, "At that time, Herod the Tetrarch had heard the reports about Jesus. And he said to his attendants, 'This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him.' Now Herod had arrested John and had bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. And on Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guest and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, 'Give me here, on a platter, the head of John the Baptist.' The king was distressed but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted. And he had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it, and then they went and they told Jesus." So this is a pretty grim story. Many of us here are familiar with this, and this is one of the most wild ones. So let's put, and I kind of want to start here with how Matthew describes Herod. Because the way that Matthew describes Herod not only tells us what Matthew thought of Herod, but it also actually helps us to understand a lot about Herod. So who here remembers how we normally refer to Herod? Do we call him Herod the Tetrarch? We call him King Herod. Why is he called King Herod? Because he's king of the Jews, right? See, in their political system, so when the Seleucids, of course, had come and they had conquered and they were ruling and very oppressive and they destroyed almost everything, one of the reasons that prompted a lot of that is the Jews were very rebellious and absolutely refused the worship of pagan gods, right? They refused to worship Zeus. They refused to worship Ares and any of the other gods. And so when the Romans came around, the Romans decided they were going to finally, they had enough of the disorder that was being caused by the Greeks. They began to conquer. They went east, first taking out Greece and Macedonia, coming across, taking over what was left of Persia and the Seleucid Empire, and then heading down into the Ptolemies, eventually completely securing the Mediterranean Sea. And for the first time ever, the Mediterranean Sea was peaceful. And this is, by the way, one of the reasons why the Roman Empire was so fruitful. The Roman Empire did so well because trade could now commence on the Mediterranean Sea, and the army made sure that if there was any pirates, we took care of them. And so people could actually trade and barter happen, and things went very, very well for the Roman Empire. Now, except for this one little spot on the map. That one little spot was Israel. See, Israel refused to work. Like, Rome had this way of conquering people. Like, they would show up, they would conquer the people, and they'd say, "Hey, these gods that you worship," by the way, who knows, right across from St. Peter's Square, there's a very famous cathedral now. Does anyone remember what it's called in Rome? Why am I'm struggling to remember what it's called now. They turned it into a giant cathedral, but it was at one point, it's like this giant eye, and they considered it was a giant temple. And what they had done, yeah, I see everyone doing like, you've heard of this? I can't think of what it's called. Yeah, it sounds right. I think it's the Oculus, maybe. And so what they would do is they would set up shrines to all these gods. And what they had this habit of doing is saying, "You know this god Zeus that you worship? Well, we worship him too, but we call him Jupiter. You know the god Ares that you worship? We worship him too, but we call him Mars," right? And so on and so forth. They just had this habit of bringing in this this pagan worship all together and forming like essentially one super religion. But when they got to the Jews said, no, there is one God, and he has no name. We call him the I Am. He is who he is, right? And there is no one on earth who has power over him. There is no shrine that can be built to him. Right? We can't build an idol to Yahweh. This is impossible. And so as part of making a deal, Herod was allowed to call himself king, right? Even though he wasn't really a king. And Matthew's making this very clear. He wasn't king, he was a tetrarch. A tetrarch was part of the Roman political system. And what Matthew is saying here is Herod is actually just a puppet of Rome, right? You want to know who Herod was? Herod wasn't this man who sought after the love of God or sought after the love of the Jewish people or anything like that. He is a man who serves the Romans. And of course, because here's the thing, and we talked about this, so he has this party, these people come out, his niece comes out and does this dance for everybody, and he's like, oh, I'm so happy, by an oath. And who remembers what I said back in Judges? I said one of the lessons that we learned in the book of Judges is never make an oath, okay? Oaths never work out. Right? He said, what does Jesus tell us? Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Just be a person of your word. That's it. You don't need to swear by the moon or the stars or anything like that. You don't need to swear by the Lord Almighty. You don't need to make an oath or anything like that. Just say, I will do what I need to do. Now, I think part of this, too, is that Herod is kind of using this as a little bit of an excuse, right? It said he was afraid to kill John, but he really wanted to. And now finally he's given this golden opportunity. I can finally get rid of John the Baptist. This man who has the audacity to tell me I can't steal my brother's wife, right? Which when you say it out loud, you realize why John was doing what he was doing. But this is like how corrupt things had gotten, how bad things has gotten, right? John, for the serious crime of saying, hey, Herod, you shouldn't steal your brother's wife, was put in a prison. And of course this happens and John is of course beheaded and things aren't going well of course for John, but one of the things that I love about John and I love about this story is we see John does not relent, John does not recant. John was given this opportunity while he was in prison, right? He could have taken back what he said. He could have begged for forgiveness from Herodias and from Herod. He could have done any of these things. But what John said was, what is right, what is wrong, and I will not confirm your sin, Herod. To the point where it cost him his life. That's important for us to recognize today. Now, of course, we're going to pick up here in verse 13. It says, when Jesus had heard what had happened, right? So Jesus hears the news, and if you remember, right, the news takes a little bit of time to get around, right? They don't got a telegraph, they don't got telephone, they don't got text messaging, they don't have any of that. It takes time for the message to get around. But when the message does get around, Jesus hears it, and it says he withdrew by a boat privately to a solitary place. But hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And when Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. And as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it is already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Bring them here to me. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up into heaven, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, and then he gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate until they were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. Now, Rebecca's heard my gripe about this many, many times, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. That last little line at the end there, besides the women and the children, this is a note that's been added later, because this is one of those things where they kind of want people to understand, look, they back in that day, they only counted the men, but there were other people there. But as I've often said, it doesn't matter to me if it was 100, 200, 5,000, 10,000, 20, it doesn't matter. The point is there was 5 loaves and 2 fish. And this is the cool thing, and this is the best part about this miracle, right? It says they ate until they were satisfied. But one of the arguments that could be out there is, well, maybe people just said they were satisfied and really they were still hungry, right? Maybe they just had like a little bit to eat, but really they were actually still left hungry. Except for, and this is one of the things that I love about this miracle, and it's one of the ways that Jesus and God is giving us to understand, hey, this was a real miracle. Something crazy happened here. Is that not only were the people eating until they were satisfied, but there was more left over than when they began. So even if the people lied, and even if the people didn't eat anything at all, somehow the leftovers was greater than what they began with. It's one of the things that I love about this story is that it doesn't matter how many people were there. It could be, like I said, 100. It could be 20 people. It doesn't matter. The point is, God provided for them. And this isn't the first time we see this. We look back through the Old Testament and we see the widow with her son, and all she has left is a little bit of flour and oil. And she says to Elijah, as Elijah shows up to the door, she says, "Sorry, Elijah, I have nothing to feed you with. All I have is this little bit of oil and flour. I'm just going to make a little loaf of bread for me and my son to eat, and then we're going to go off and die because there's no food left." And Elijah says, "If you feed me, I guarantee you that will never run out until this famine ends." And so what did she do? She trusted God. She said, okay, if God's prophet tells me this thing, if he's speaking on behalf of God, and God's going to do this thing for me, I'm going to trust you, Elijah. And every day she opened that pot, there was just a little bit of flour. And every day she opened that jug, there was just a little bit of oil. But every day she went back, there was enough for that day. And they ate every single day until the famine ended. See, here's the thing. A lot of times when we want God to provide for us, we want him to provide the excess, right? I don't want a car, I want a Corvette, right? I don't want a TV, I don't want a job, I want the best job, right? We want God to provide us with, like I said, not what we need, but like the excess. And God's like, no, I know how to take care of you. I know exactly what you need, and I will provide you for that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and rag on people with wealth. I think that's stupid. I think that people work hard, and people who work hard have earned it, and they deserve it. I'm not one of those people. I know that there are some preachers and some Christians that feel that way, and I completely disagree. Abraham was an incredibly wealthy man. Incredibly wealthy. Right? Isaac and Jacob, incredibly wealthy people. We read about incredibly wealthy people that God continues to bless over and over and over again throughout the Bible. Not because they're wealthy, but because of where their heart is. Again and again, God continues to bless them, provide for them, take care of them, and give them plenty because of their heart for him. And so these people that are coming, these people are genuinely seeking after God. Some of them are still chasing miracles. We know about that. But you know that the ones that are sick, right? Because we've been in that situation. We've had family members who are dying of some terrible illness or who were ravaged by some terrible disease. And they are desperately calling out, "Lord, Lord, I need you." Right? We know that there are those people in the crowd as well. And their faith is genuine. Their faith is real. And Jesus sees them and goes, "I love you so much that I want to help you." Right, despite Jesus' own pain. Because remember, this is Jesus' cousin. Right, he gets the word back. Hey, your cousin's been beheaded for declaring the way for the Lord. Your cousin has been killed because he stood firm in the ways of God. Right, that probably hit Jesus hard. Right, and it wasn't just some remote cousin. This was someone he was close with. We know that they were raised kind of together, and that they certainly were very well aware of each other and knew each other quite well. But despite Jesus' pain, despite what Jesus was going through, Jesus looked around and he said, "There is a job for me to do, and I'm willing to do it, and I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to love on you, and God will provide." But it doesn't end there. We're going to finish by going through the next little story here in verse 22. It says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. And while he dismissed the crowd, and after he dismissed them, then he didn't go join them. He went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And this is a pretty famous story that many of us know. We're very well familiar with this, right? It's literally, we literally named, there's an insect, right? I'm sure you guys see them little water skimmers, and people call them what? They call them the Jesus bug. Have you never heard that? Yeah, you've heard it. It's just kind of like a comment. They'll call them Jesus bugs because these little bugs will walk on water. It's so ingrained in our culture that this idea, this story, it's so wild to so many of us, and it really stands out, which is amazing to me. Not the healings, not healing the blind, or even the water into wine, or any of these other amazing miracles that Jesus does. The one that really stands out to us is, how did he walk on water? Right? To the point where we even see this illusion being done many, many times in movies, where they'll have this kind of thing set up where you'll see someone walk on water and you know exactly the type of image that they're drawing on. But you can understand, once again, why the disciples feel this way. Remember, we've already had the story where Jesus was fast asleep in the boat. The boat was being rocked. They thought they were going to sink. And they said, "Jesus, what are we going to do?" And I said, I said, Jesus doesn't get up there and pray. He doesn't say some sort of chant. He doesn't do any sort of ritual. He just gets up and he goes, "Enough!" And the storm stops. And in this case, all he does, he's just walking out. The winds are raging, the waves are going, and I love it because I feel like in every visualization, right? Anytime anyone's ever done an animation or they do any movie, they always do it the same, and I kind of like it. It's just Jesus walking without a care in the world, storms raging around him, and he's just like, "Yep, but I'm God. God is with me. What do I have to worry about?" To the point where when they see him, they freak out. Now, wouldn't you? Right? Imagine this to yourself. Have any of you ever been in a situation like this, by the way? You're out in a boat and the storm hits and it's terrifying. Probably one of the scariest experiences of my life was this happening. When I hear about the terror of the disciples, I'm like, I get it. When a storm comes up on you and you're out in the water and you are completely out of control and there's nothing you can do, there's nothing more terrifying than being in that moment. I get it. And then a ghost starts walking across the water. I get it. They're really freaking out at this point. But what does Jesus say? Right? Peter looks out, he recognizes Jesus, and he says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out to you." And he says, "Come. Come on." Now, I want us to recognize what happens here, because I think this is sometimes one of those things that we kind of get caught up on. Peter, the one on whom the church is built upon, right? Peter, the rock. Remember, he was renamed. He was Simon. He named him Peter. He's the rock on which he's going to build the church. Peter gets out and he starts walking on water. In my mind, this is always kind of one of those Wile E. Coyote moments, where he's going along, but he doesn't quite realize that he's over the air yet, right? Peter doesn't quite realize how bad the situation is. And it says he's walking on water. His faith is sustaining. But the moment that he loses focus, when he stops looking at Jesus and instead focuses back on the terror that is around him, the ravages of the wind, the buffeting of the waves, then suddenly his faith withers away and he begins to sink. Immediately, Jesus grabs hold of him and says, And I love this, right? It doesn't say Jesus rebukes him. It doesn't say Jesus gets mad at him. He's angry with him. He just says, Peter, why do you got such little faith? My brother, what's going on? And then every one of them at that moment, Jesus picks Peter up out of the water, gets him back into the boat. Then Jesus climbs into the boat. And every one of those disciples had a decision to make in that moment. And every one of them, it says, bowed down and said, truly you are the Son of God. One of the things about the Christian faith is that it's not a one-time decision that you just make, right? It's one of those things that people will often try and throw in our face to say that, well, God can't be just because, well, if Hitler repented, then God would forgive him. Now, I'm just saying, right? Because people always bring this up. They say, if Hitler repented, would God forgive him? And our answer has to be, and they know what our answer has to be, our answer has to be yes. But I would bet $1, okay? I would bet $1 on whether or not Hitler got saved. Because let me tell you, if he did, the odds against him were insurmountable. I'd probably be richer than Elon Musk today, okay? Like, let's face it. Right? People like to ask these edge case questions. They want to know, well, could he be? Would he be? Is it possible that he is? It's like, absolutely, Jesus could. It is possible that he could, but do you really think that he did? Do you really think that after those monstrous years of his life, after everything he did, after everything he went through, that suddenly he just had a turn of heart and went, oh, you know what? This was wrong. Or do you think it's more like what we've talked about before, where the more that we harden our own hearts, the harder it gets, right? Eventually, no matter how hard Jesus tries, right, if you pour water on a rock, the water goes around, right? When you get yourself that packed in, when you get yourself that jaded, when you allow yourself to be that hard, the water's not going to get through, no matter how much Jesus may want to try and save you, no matter how much Jesus might want to soften your heart. If you do that to yourself, there is no redemption. Why do I say this? Because I want us to understand that it's not just a one-time decision. It's not something that we did once when we were a kid or once when we were newly saved as an adult, whatever it was for you, but that it's an everyday occurrence. We have to ask ourselves, am I going to submit to God today or not? Do I want to be at his feet and say, truly you are the Son of God, or not? Because if we don't go after this day after day, week after week, and make sure that we make a concerted effort, because Christianity doesn't happen by accident. It's an intentional decision that we have to make, following in Jesus' footsteps, following the decisions he's made, following after his designs and his desires for us. Those are intentional choices. And are we going to look at all the wonders that Jesus has done then, all the wonders that Jesus has done now, and are we going to actually submit ourselves under his authority, or are we going to allow ourselves to become as jaded as Herod, who despite, right, if he would have looked at the Torah, he would have saw, yeah, you know what, John, you're right. I shouldn't be stealing my brother's wife. But he allowed himself to become so hard, so jaded, that instead he'd rather just kill him. You're causing me a nuisance, John. I want to get rid of you. So we're getting ready. We're going to have a time of communion this morning. And a time of communion is an acknowledgement that we are saying, Jesus, you are King of Kings. You are Lord of Lords. And it is in your kingdom that I submit. It is in your kingdom that I want to be. And I choose your ways over my ways, your ways over this world's ways. And so as we get ready to go to this time of communion, I just want us to all take that time to reflect. As I get ready to pass out the emblems, I would just ask, let's take that time and reflect and ask ourselves, where's my heart at? Am I allowing myself to stay soft and allow Jesus to speak to me? Or have I allowed myself to become hard because I'd rather have things my way and do things my way? It's a decision and a choice and a question we need to ask ourselves frequently, often, because we need to ask ourselves day after day, week after week, hey, is Jesus Lord of my life? Or have I allowed that to slip away?